What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, interesting interview that took place between former world champion, now well-renowned future Hall of Fame trainer, former trainer of the year, Robert Garcia. Robert Garcia, he broke down the massive, undisputed future showdown between undefeated, newly crowned, three-belt, unified welterweight world champion superstar boxer Errol "The Truth" Spence Jr., who is widely considered by many to be the top three best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Errol Spence Jr. is now 28 wins, no losses, no draw, 22 big wins by way of knockout. He is 32 years of age, 5'9.5" with a 72-inch arm reach, and undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the reigning WBO World Boxing Organization welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and Terence "Bud" Crawford, who is 38 wins, no losses, no draw, 29 big wins by way of knockout. He is 34 years of age, 5'8" with a 74-inch arm reach. With that said, that's the most highly anticipated fight possibly of this decade or the last 2 decades. Now, everybody wanted to see Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. 2 legends go at it. They were already cemented as legends, Hall of Famers, by the time they went at it. But it was 5 years too late. They both was in their late 30s. And the fight itself didn't live up to the billing. Now, it broke pay-per-view records, it broke revenue records and things of that nature, but the fight itself didn't live up to the billing, okay? Many people felt like they were past their primes. Manny Pacquiao had already been knocked out 3 times, brutally knocked out by Juan Marquez, multiple losses, outboxed in fights. So it just didn't have the same luster. He had draws on his resume. Now, Floyd Mayweather obviously retired undefeated. But the last time we saw a fight of this magnitude, it took place in September 16th of 1981 between 2 undefeated fighters. One was the undefeated world champion in Sugar Ray Leonard, and the other was the undefeated world champion in Thomas the Hitman Hearns. That was an undisputed match. There was only the WBA and WBC titles on the line at that point in time, okay? And so with that said, you know, that's the last time we had a fight of that magnitude. That was 1981, 41 years ago, okay? Now, this is 2 undefeated fighters at the apex of their career, at the absolute prime, looking to get it on for undisputed, where their history will be made because there'll be 4 belts on the line, okay? The WBC, the IBF, the WBA for Errol Spence Jr., and the WBO for Terence Crawford. So, 4 belts. History will be made. There's never been an undisputed 4 major sanction belt holder at welterweight. So Robert Garcia, he's very familiar with Errol Spence Jr. because his brother, who's a future first ballot surefire Hall of Famer and 4-division world champion Mexican superstar boxer Mikey Garcia, fought Errol Spence, called out Errol Spence, and felt like he saw something in Errol Spence that he can exploit, okay? So Mikey Garcia, at the time, was 39 wins, okay? 39 wins, no losses, no draws, okay? And 30 wins by way of knockout. So he was top 5 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. 39 wins, no losses, no draws, 30 big wins by way of knockout, and he was top 5 pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Now, Mikey Garcia, he was a world champion at 126, 130, 135, and 140, okay? Now, many people, they'll point to Errol Spence fight Mikey Garcia, and they'll say Mikey Garcia was too small, okay? Mikey Garcia hadn't fought at the weight class, you know, 147, okay? He was a 35-pounder fighting a guy who was a big welterweight, a 47-pounder, which is not true. 3 of Mikey Garcia's last 5 fights were at 140, okay? Junior welterweight, okay? He was a world champion at 140. He dipped back down to 135 to face off against Robert Easter Jr. to defend his titles, to simultaneously hold belts at 130 and 135 and 140. That's the only reason he did that, because he didn't want to lose his belt, and he unified the belt against Robert Garcia, okay? I mean, Robert Easter Jr., excuse me. And he won the fight against Robert Easter, unanimous decision. He even dropped Robert Garcia at one time in the fight, okay? So with that said, 3 out of his last 5 fights were at 140, okay? So with that said, Mikey Garcia, he stated he was daring to be great. He wanted to do what the great Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran, did when he jumped up from 135 all the way to 147 to challenge, ironically, Sugar Ray Leonard, okay? Who Sugar Ray Leonard was a guy that Errol Spence looked up to, okay? That was his idol in the sport of boxing. He wanted to model his game after Sugar Ray Leonard. And Roberto Duran, he jumped up from 135 to 147, okay? No fights at junior welterweight. He didn't have any fights at 140, okay? Right over 140, 147, challenged Sugar Ray Leonard, and guess what? He beat Sugar Ray Leonard, okay? So Mikey Garcia, another Hall of Famer, okay? Just like Roberto Duran. Now, not confusing him, saying he's as great as the great Roberto Duran, okay? Who ended up becoming a world champion at middleweight and things of that nature, okay? I'm not saying he's as great as the great Roberto Duran, okay? But Mikey Garcia is a future first ballot Hall of Famer who stated he saw something in Errol Spence that he can exploit. Errol Spence reminded him of himself, and he felt like he could beat Errol Spence Jr., okay? So with that said, he moved up in weight, saw something in Errol Spence, and he got absolutely dominated in the fight. Absolutely dominated in the fight, in which Robert Garcia, he stated that Terence Crawford shouldn't make the mistake that many other fighters make. Now, he stated that he believes that Terence Crawford is going to take this fight just as serious as Errol Spence, and vice versa, okay? Nobody's going to take each other lightly. But he was asked if Errol Spence is the boogeyman at 147, and he said absolutely. He stated that what a lot of people make a mistake when they fight Mikey is they think they see something in the ring, and it's not quite like that when they get in the ring themselves, okay? So they make the mistake of thinking that, not underestimating them, but just feeling like there's some flaws they feel like they can exploit, but they're a lot better than what they lead you to believe, okay? So he stated that Errol Spence was a lot smarter, a lot more technically savvy, and a lot more disciplined than they expected. He stated that he was always 2 steps ahead of Mikey, and it wasn't his sheer size and strength that beat Mikey Garcia. It was his ring IQ. It was his mind. He beat Mikey Garcia with his mind, which was shocking to them, because Mikey Garcia is a very savvy, very smart, high ring IQ boxer, okay? Pure boxer. And Errol Spence beat Mikey Garcia at his own game, okay? So with that said, Errol Spence, he outboxed Mikey Garcia. Now, Mikey Garcia is not as tall as Errol Spence, okay? Mikey Garcia is 5'6" with a 68-inch arm reach, okay? He's still bigger than Manny Pacquiao. Orthodox fighter with a lot of power, counter puncher, very skilled. But, he was able to, he thought this was his Roberto Duran moment, that he was going to be able to shock the world and beat Errol Spence Jr. like Roberto Duran did with Sugar Ray Leonard, okay? And that wasn't the case. Size doesn't always matter, as we see heavyweights like Mike Tyson, 5'10.5", 5'11" at best, beating guys that's 6'4", 6'5", things of that nature that outweigh Mike Tyson by 30, 40 pounds. Deontay Wilder fighting guys and beating guys who outweigh him by 50 pounds, 30 pounds, things of that nature. Floyd Mayweather beating Canelo Alvarez, who outweighed him by a good 25 pounds, okay? So, Mikey Garcia, he thought he was going to do what Roberto Duran did with Sugar Ray Leonard, and it was anything but what he expected, not because of the size and the physicality of Errol Spence Jr., because of the ring IQ of Errol Spence Jr. So he's saying that, he's warning Terence Crawford, He's a lot better than what you think. Okay, so Roberto Duran is 5'7" with a 66-inch arm reach. Mikey Garcia is 5'6" with a 68-inch arm reach. So he actually has 2-inch arm reach advantage over Roberto Duran. Okay, so he has longer arms than Roberto Duran has. And so with that said, you know, he thought he was going to beat Sugar Ray Leonard, who is, you know, 5'10", you know, with a 72-inch arm reach, okay? A much taller guy, much more rangy guy, much better athlete, okay? 5'10" with a 72-inch arm reach, similar stature to that of Errol Spence. So Robert Garcia, who's a very smart, very well-renowned trainer, high ring IQ, he stated that, you know, Terence Crawford can't make the mistake of thinking that what he sees and holds in Errol Spence's game is actually there, because he's a lot better than what you expect when you actually get in the ring. And it shocked Mikey Garcia. So he's stating that, you know, don't underestimate the mindset of Errol Spence. Now you see Errol Spence, he just dominated former WBA Cuban star boxer Yordenis Ugas, welterweight world champion, who was 5'9" with a 73-inch arm reach. They updated his status, and he dominated, just physically imposed his will on Yordenis Ugas and dominated Yordenis Ugas. So Robert Garcia is saying, don't let that be a measuring stick, a barometer to what you believe is going to happen, because his ring IQ is much better than what meets the eye. Okay, and another thing about it is that, you know, Terence Crawford is very savvy in the ring. Terence Crawford has a high ring IQ. Terence Crawford is a dog, you know, but at times the problem is Terence Crawford can fight with emotion. Okay, that's where the problem lies. Terence Crawford at times can fight with emotion. Andre Ward always said this when he's describing Terence Crawford. You know, when Terence Crawford get hit, he wants to fight. Okay, he don't want to box anymore. He wants to fight. And so, you know, do you want to get in that type of exchange when you're dealing with a guy that's big, strong, and savvy and skilled as Errol Spence Jr.? So what Robert Garcia is saying is that you have to be very careful believing that Errol Spence is just a thudder. Okay, Errol Spence is much more than an aggressive, big, strong, thudding fighter. He's a very high ring IQ, and he stated that, you know, that played a major part, because every adjustment Mikey made, they made two adjustments. So he stated that that could be an issue. But obviously, they have history with Terence Crawford in the amateurs. I believe they're 1-1. I believe Mikey Garcia beat Terence Crawford one time, and Terence Crawford beat Mikey Garcia one time in the amateurs. And Mikey Garcia, he stated he don't like the style of Terence Crawford. He was a mover, much more mobile fighter than he is currently today. Now, Terence Crawford has knocked out 10 of his last 11 opponents. So with that said, you know, Terence Crawford, you know, definitely has power in both hands, very rangy, but he's coming up from 130, 135. Naturally a smaller guy than Errol Spence Jr., but Terence Crawford has a high ring IQ, ability to switch from southpaw to orthodox. The difference is that, you know, Errol Spence Terence Crawford mostly has his advantages when he's in the orthodox stance. But Errol Spence is a naturally big, gifted, strong southpaw, okay? So I know Terence Crawford has his advantages when he's in the southpaw stance, excuse me. But Errol Spence is a southpaw, so he's going to negate that. So this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out. The rubber's going to meet the road. So let's see how this unfolds and plays out. But that's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notification. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all in one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.